Good afternoon to everybody. Got a nice crowd. I introduced myself to a few of you, but I am Jim Swason, and now we are all ready to talk here. Jim Swason, I'm a retired pastor, but not really so retired, living in Elwood City with my family and still serving the Camp Run Presbyterian Church out in Farm Bell, not too far away. So I've been there since 2018 when I officially retired. For the first 33 years of my life and my wife's, Karen's life, we were Lutheran. And then in 1976, we became Presbyterian because we moved from Illinois to Pennsylvania, and we could not, every week we had to go so far to find a Lutheran church, like 10, 15, 20, 25 minutes, and we drove right past a little Presbyterian church like half a mile from where we lived. So finally we said, why are we doing this? Let's just try that one out. And we loved it, nice little congregation, very small, got to know the people there. So from there I went to seminary in Pittsburgh. 1985 I graduated, and since then have served in Sandy Lake, in Mount Jackson, at Bell Church in Elwood City, where we live now, and also at Covenant Presbyterian Church in Butler. That's where I got interested in the Underground Railroad, because Covenant, it was founded in 1813, so it goes back a ways. Covenant was one of the stops on the Underground Railroad, and I've learned so much since I was there. We actually constructed a little Underground Railroad museum in the basement of that church. And I've given many talks around the area about the Underground Railroad. So today there'll be a little bit of both, kind of a review of Underground Railroad, just to scratch the surface, and then also to talk to you about quilts. And I think we've got enough here handouts. Where is Kathy? Kathy? While I was at Covenant Presbyterian in Butler, from about 2001 to 2018, I got interested in the Underground Railroad because that was a stop on the Underground Railroad there, in the basement of the church. Since then, I've kind of combined that with some other things. We retired. Karen and I are living in Elwood City, where I was the whole time I was serving at Covenant, but I commuted. And the church there at Camp Run decided to have a quilt show 1 year before I came in 2017. Rosalind Coomer was the pastor there then. And she had some nice old quilts in her house that she wanted to display, and she invited everybody else from the community to bring them. It was a great success. So the year afterwards, they decided, let's have another quilt show. But this time, they got interested in making a particular quilt that had the coded symbols of the Underground Railroad, which is what I'm going to talk about also today. Now, I guess I can take this with me, I understand. Okay. How many of you grew up in Zelienople? Okay, a few. How many grew up in Zelienople? How many of you have ever heard of Eleanor Burns? Okay. There are some papers up here that you can have afterwards if you'd like to get a few. Eleanor is 80 years old now. She was born here. She wrote a book called Quilt in a Day. And the Quilt in a Day book is this one here. It has patterns inside where you can make a quilt. And in fact, this particular book is all about making the Underground Railroad story quilt. And so it has all of those patterns. I'm going to go through those today with you and show you those one at a time, talk about what each pattern is and how it might have been helpful to aid the runaway slaves from the South who were trying to get to Canada, trying to get north. So Eleanor started that book there. It was really after another book that was written by Jacqueline Tobin and Raymond Dobard called Hidden in Plain Sight. That was what inspired Eleanor to do this quilt. That's really the story of why the quilts were important. they were able to give some help to the runaway slaves as they were headed north in plain sight. So these quilts were actually, it is believed, constructed by those who lived on the plantations. They would use them as teaching devices. They would put them up in the courtyard. Plantation owners could care less. Oh yeah, it's a quilt. But each of those were, one quilt said, get ready to go. The time is right. Another quilt reminded them to pack certain things. Another quilt reminded them when they left to follow the river or to look for the North Star or other things. And even along the way, there were quilts. Someone could just hang a quilt on the clothesline, and it might say, this is a safe house. You can stop here. These were things that only the ones who knew the code, could interpret. And so the conductors used those. Certainly the runaway slaves used those as help. So we'll go over that today. Also, there's a book here that I wanted to recommend. Sue Monk Kidd. I don't know if you've read any books by Sue Monk Kidd. She wrote The Secret Life of Bees, which is a movie. Really good writer. This is historical fiction, and I loved it. I'm going to donate this copy to the library here, but you can always probably get one from the local library too. The invention of wings, that whole idea of inventing wings is sort of a African-American, it's a cultural heritage sort of a thing. The children were taught to dream of a time when they could actually have wings and fly away to freedom. So that's what she named her book. It's about Sarah Grimke, who is a real person, and you'll find out more about her if you'd read this book. She and her sister were very ardent abolitionists up north, Quakers. So that's a good one to read. There's also a little, I think there's one for everybody here, if anybody wants to help pass. So I'm sorry to keep working. I'll get you a coffee at McDonald's. Okay. Really like that book. There are other materials. Of course, if you're interested in pursuing this more, I can help you later. But we probably should get along here. How much do you know about the Underground Railroad? Just give me holler out a few things that you know about it. No. Okay. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah. Well, you've heard of it, right? You've heard of the Underground Railroad. I've given a lot of talks to school children, and sometimes it's funny to have them draw a picture of what they think the Underground Railroad is, and it usually comes up to be a locomotive in a tunnel. But it was not underground, literally. It was not a railroad, literally, and but it was secret to the extent that there were those along the way that helped to get people, from where they were down south. Now, before I start the slides, one thing that people don't know probably is that there is. I'm going to go back here and see if I can't skip around and show you a map. Okay. Here we go. That was up there. I had it. There he is. Okay. If you look, and again, I better take this with me, I guess. The Underground Railroad, first of all, there was an original Slave Act. It was 1837. And that said that slaves were property. Slave owners had the right to get their property back if that was gone, if they left. And it was legal to pay to have a bounty hunter come and bring your slave back. That was really just in the South from 1837 up till 1850. In 1850, the area was expanded so that at that point, not just one of the free states, and I'll give you the list there later, but one of the free states, if you could get to, let's say, Maryland from the South, or if you get to Pennsylvania, it was mostly a non-slave state. You could be free, but you could still be trapped and brought back. Anybody see was it 7 Years a Slave or 9 Years a Slave? A movie, yeah. Even the free slaves that were up north who had gotten their freedom could be dragged back down and made slaves again. So the Underground Railroad is especially important after 1850. We have coming up this way a good lot of activity right along here when you've got New Brighton, Darlington, West Bridgewater, Beaver Falls, New Galilee, all the way up the line. It's the Ohio-Pennsylvania line there, because they wanted to get up to Cleveland and take the boat across to Canada. That was really the goal. And on that route, you'd see a lot of places here that have been certified as hiding places. New Brighton has a wonderful, I think they have 8 or 9 verified safe houses that you can visit on a tour. Same with Darlington. Washington, PA has a very nice Underground Railroad museum. Got a quick story to tell you that has to do with denominations. I was telling somebody here that I grew up Lutheran and my wife did, so this is home. I'm not an alien to the Lutheran senior care. But for the last 44 years, we've been Presbyterian. And I met a man named Reed Stewart, who was a retired pastor as well. And he was active down in the Greene County area, a little east of Pittsburgh. And he wrote a book about this. Has anybody ever visited a free Presbyterian church? There are free Methodist churches around. There's still one in Elwood. A free Presbyterian church? Nope. You haven't, because there are none anymore. But in 1850, when the new slave compromise went into effect, it said, hey, you can be dragged back from anywhere in the continental United States. There was a General Assembly convention, and the Presbyterian Church in the U.S. Said, well, let's consider whether we should be sanctuary for the runaway slaves, where we could provide them shelter and safety. They debated it, as always, and they said, no, I don't think it's too risky. And it was risky, because if you were caught, you could be fined, your church could be fined, you could be put in jail, and the property could be confiscated. So they said, as a denomination, no, we don't think we can do that. But a small group of them said, well, this is no excuse. We're going to separate from that larger denominations. We're going to form the Free Presbyterian Church on our own terms, and we will be committed to getting those runaway slaves to the north. And they did. They joined with the Quakers, and they were very active. Most of these places here were organized by Free Presbyterian churches. Here's the really interesting part. After the Emancipation Proclamation, when Lincoln freed the slaves, they had another convention of the Free Presbyterian Church, and they said to themselves, well, the purpose for which we formed ourselves has been fulfilled. The slaves are free. So we will now disband, go back to the family that we left. And they then became part of the larger Presbyterian Church again. So that's why today there are no Free Presbyterian churches. They're gone. Now, I've got a couple of slides here. I'm just going to flip through because I've kind of lost my way on some of the things you might want to look. Why would they still want to go to Canada? Well, the slave catchers would, as I told you, capture you and return you. The original Fugitive Slave Act of 1793 said you could keep those slaves. Here were the free states in 1830. Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana. Up until 1850, if you could get to any of those states, you were essentially free unless you got recaptured. So that was good, but not after 1850. Here are some of the wanted posters. I'll go back a couple because these are kind of interesting. First of all, when would you run away? It was sort of common knowledge that the best time to run away from the plantation would be on a holiday like Christmas or Easter, because the plantation owner and his family were busy celebrating. And so you could slip out without maybe as much notice as you would be. There'd be no work. You wouldn't be in the fields. You might not make it, but it was a good bet. The other time was if you're going to escape on a Saturday, Friday night, because the wanted posters could not be printed until the printer was back in business on Monday morning. So that gave 2 days for you to hit the road, okay? So these are some of the wanted posters. $100, I like this one, $100 reward for Emily. And it always says, when they ran away on the 27th of July, my black woman, 17 years of age, well-grown, black color, has a whining voice like that. She took with her one dark calico, one blue and white dress, a red corded gingham bonnet, and a white striped shawl and slippers. And this is the interesting part. I will pay the above reward if taken near the Ohio River on the side of Kentucky, like nearest to my plantation. But this is my property. I'll pay a lot to get her back. I'd pay $300 if taken in the state of Ohio and delivered to the Lewisburg County, Kentucky place. All of them sort of like the further away that they got, the more they would pay. Here's another $150. And of course, this is back then, $150. That's a lot of money in 1850. On the the night of the second, a Negro man who calls himself Henry, about 22 years old, gives the height, told what they were wearing. Now, why would you have to pay per word, I'm sure, to have the printer make these posters. So just like now, when you take an ad out, it's per word. So, of course, he's got a lot of details here. Good cook. He's handy in any capacity as a house servant. He's not trying to advertise to sell this guy. He wants him back, and he wants you to know just how valuable he is. You might be able to get more than 150 if you really can catch him. So this is from Mr. William Burke. Now, keep in mind, 100, 150. You've heard of Harriet Tubman. Wanted $40,000. She's pretty valuable, as you know. Harriet, she was called Moses because she was leading her people out of slavery. And she's wanted for helping slaves escape on the Underground Railroad. Interesting, yes. Now back to here, the Underground Railroad and the coded quilts. We're going to go back up here to, I'm going to make you dizzy. Oh yeah, railroad terminology. So for those of you who don't know anything about it, you couldn't talk openly about someone who is going to be helping here. Stations or depots were the places that were the safe places, the hiding places. That was what Covenant Church was a station. Conductors were the guides. None of these people were paid. These were all volunteer jobs for those that felt strongly about it. The conductor was the one that would get you from point A to point B safely. There was a man who lived in Portersville who had a letter handed down to him by his great-grandfather, and it was written, handed down through the family. And Roy McGee was his name. I think he's dead now, but Roy had, in a first-hand account by that letter, his grandfather said, we had a hiding place in the basement of our home, and we were glad to receive runaway slaves there. He would take them from Portersville to Mercer in the false bottom of his hay wagon. He'd hide them in there. And that was about as far as you would go, from Portersville to Mercer, to be safe. You didn't want to take all day, So you can imagine how many trips it took, the conductors, from here to here, here to here, here to here, here to here. It took hundreds of little stops on the way to Canada if you ever made it that far. And of course, there was also other things like wild animals, weather, just accidents, whatever. Station masters are those who hid the slaves in their home, passengers, cargo, or freight. This is interesting. Men were, these are the coded words, men referred to as hardware and women as dry goods. And the stockholders were the financial supporters, those who gave a lot of money for it. That was interesting. Now keep in mind, slaves were not educated. They didn't go to school. It was against the law to teach a slave to read or write. And you could be punished greatly for that. But they were intelligent. They were acquainted with the constellations, with nature, and so a lot of these coded things are having to do with things they know without having to go to school. Music, there's a lot of, just flip ahead here too. Many songs of the Underground Railroad, like Follow the Drinkin' Gourd. Okay, that's a song that basically tells them to follow the path that that the slaves would have known about already. The drinking gourd means the sky. Okay, it's the constellations up there. They knew. Follow that. Follow the North Star. The North Star was the guide for them always. Down in the river to pray. Nice song, but it reminded them, when you're running away, try to run through the river as much as you can. That'll keep the bloodhounds off of your scent. There were other things. When should you go? Well, in the spring. Best time. Not in the winter. Don't follow then. But there are a lot of these little coded things that were given. Oh, by the way, back to Reed Stewart, when he's talking about the risk that churches took. He said, for instance, in Greene County, there was a farmer who was very sympathetic to the cause. And that farmer was warned once for hiding a fugitive slave or more. And then he did it again. He was warned twice. On the third time, they said, okay, you're going to jail, which was what they did to you. They took all of his property. They confiscated the property, sold it on a sheriff's sale. And then they fined him also, like thousands of dollars, which at the time was big time. After the end of the Civil War, after emancipation, he was released from jail, but not until I think he'd been there 3 years. And he went back to the place where he had been, and all the neighbors gathered together because actually the neighbors had bought his farm. And they told him, we admire you so much because you did what we didn't have the nerve to do, what we didn't want to take the risk to do. And so we bought your farm, and now you can have it back. So for a church, for instance, if Covenant Church had been caught hiding the slaves, the pastor would have been jailed and fined. All of the members of the session, the board, would have been jailed and fined. The property would have been confiscated and their bank account emptied. But they did it anyway. And all the churches down in New Galilee and Darlington and New Brighton did that. Okay, so the one way to code messages was by song. Another one is in quilts. In 1993, Jacqueline Tobin was the first to write about this. She met an African-American quilter named Ozella Williams. That's where this all started. She had a story about hidden meanings in plantation quilts that she told. And then in 1998, Tobin and scholar Raymond Dobard published the other book that I showed you there. And after that, then it was Eleanor Burns who was inspired to write her book about quilting. She's done a lot of books. Let me see, I think something here I had. Eleanor was born in 1945. She'd be 80 today. She first began sewing on a crank handle toy sewing machine as a child. And she started stitching on her Aunt Edna's feed sacks. She attended Edinburgh State College, earned a Bachelor of Science degree in education, then went on to a graduate program at Penn State, and she became a special education teacher in the Pittsburgh Public Schools. But her first book was in 1978 called Make a Quilt in a Day, Log Cabin Pattern. She started with one pattern. That was very successful. Since then, she's written more than 100 books on quilting. She's created many new quilt patterns, very inventive, and developed a series of specialty rulers for quilting. She also had a Quilt in a Day TV series on PBS that aired in 1990 for 6 seasons. It was called Make a Quilt in a Day. And she had another special called Women Who Taught Us to Sew, in which she taught about the historical women who were influential in the field of quilting. How many of you have quilted? Okay. How many of you remember where you learned it? You usually remember. My wife was quilting, and we remember exactly who it was. It was Velma Roy who taught her to quilt. She taught her to quilt with a hoop, not with a frame. So she could take that when we were on vacation in her lap, Took a while, but it was well worth it. So Eleanor Burns, sort of a local celebrity here. Here is the quilt that is called the Coded Underground Railroad Quilt, and you'll see that there are, starts in the upper left, and goes along here. I handed out that paper there with the names of some of the quilt squares, so we're going to go through them one at a time. First one is Jacob's Ladder, and you'll see that that's at the top on the left-hand side. Very old quilt block pattern before the Revolutionary War and known by other names, but that is basically sort of a starting out to acknowledge that it is God who is guiding these folks on their journey. Just like Jacob was guided to heaven on a ladder there. Let me read a couple of other things about that. I'm going to put this back on the stand there. I'm sorry, do you have a question? You can interrupt any time here, that's fine. Here. I'm used to a bigger pulpit. I know, it went away. I'll have to get it back. Okay. That is at the end of my presentation, if you want to stick around, that's Lars Morrison, who was the sexton, the janitor at Covenant the whole time I was there. Wonderful guy, bagpiper, he has a lot of skills. He recorded for YouTube a tour of the Underground Railroad, and I have it's about 10 minutes long, I think, but you can stick around and see that if you'd like. The thing is that Covenant Church, you can't visit it anymore because membership went down to about 28 people, and they couldn't afford the heat and everything, so they sold it 3 years ago. And they've moved to another smaller church. It's sitting empty right now if you'd like to buy it. Mr. Oliver from Oliver Outdoor Advertising is the one who bought it as an investment. He can't find anybody else that wants it. So I think for about $230,000, you could get a nice big church with a lot of history. Okay, I'm going to go back to here and start from the beginning. I'm not a... There we go, Jacob's Ladder, and let's see here. It was unknown during the pre-Civil War days. It was chosen by Eleanor Burns to recall and honor the brave and desperate fugitives who escaped the horrors of slavery, and she sort of decided to start with that quilt there. Monkey wrench, the next one. Okay, monkey wrench meant basically, well, the monkey wrench was really the name of the blacksmith on any plantation, and he did all the work. That blacksmith often would work for more than one plantation because he was very skilled. So he was a very invaluable source of information. He could pass the word from one plantation to the other. You know, the neighbors up here to the north, they're going to be leaving soon, and then you might want to join them. Or the neighbors up here to the north tried to leave, but they were discovered, so don't go now. The monkey wrench pattern signaled it's time to prepare for the journey, wait for the go ahead to go, but for now, it's time to think about this. Next is the wagon wheel. Again, sort of like they would think about taking a wagon. Usually, this is more figurative because you're not going to get into a big Conestoga wagon and start out north and not be discovered. You know, these are going to be a few at a time, hiding in the bushes, going from one place to the next with the help of the conductor. So it's symbolic. It's a quilt block pattern that dates back to 1785. It means time to board the figurative wagon, time to run. Carpenter's wheel, variation. That's a very beautiful one. With the help of Jesus, the master carpenter, again, a reminder you're traveling only with God's guidance and the protection of prayer. Next is the Bear's Trail. Pretty simple, but it's just a reminder. If you're in the woods, follow where the wildlife goes, because the wildlife is going to look for water, and you're going to need water. So follow the trails. Bear's Foot all the way back to a pattern of 1898. They can lead you to both food and water. Fill your basket. As it says here, one of the most difficult things is you couldn't take a lot with you. Maybe not even a change of clothing. That's why a lot of those wanted posters would say, here's what the slave was wearing when they left. A gingham this or a woolen that. Because they might still be wearing it. They might not have had a chance to get clothes. There's another quilt pattern that we'll see where basically it says there's someone nearby that's willing to give you different clothes to help you be in disguise better. And that was often helpful. When you think about it, times haven't changed that much. It's kind of interesting when you think about it. Suppose someone robs the nearest 7-Eleven convenience store, and the police will put out a bulletin. Oh, he was wearing a black hoodie and white tennis shoes. Well, what good is that? Well, tomorrow it may not be any good at all, but for the next 10 minutes, that may help you find the man with the black hoodie and the tennis shoes. So fill your basket means take a lot of stuff with you, but not that much. And this sign, if you saw that basket hanging from someone's clothesline or their porch, meant these people will help you get some more food to take with you, just enough for a day or two. Okay. They also said tools like flint and compasses. Didn't think about that. You're going to need to find your way. Crossroads. The crossroads would have been someplace that you'll see the map that you remember that I had on there. Jamestown, New York was one of the crossroads. All the trails sort of converged. Really, you're too close here to, other places west. So Zelienople would not have been one of the crossroads. But certainly, Sharon, I think Sharon, PA. Cleveland was the crossroads. Cleveland was where everyone wanted to get to in order to take that trip across the lake. Often they referred to Cleveland as Hope. That would be a coded name for the town. Detroit was Midnight. Okay. Log cabin is a very familiar, if you're going to start out quilting, start with the log cabin. Pretty easy. Well, it's not pretty easy, but I couldn't do it. It's interesting because most of the classic log cabin quilts would have a black centerpiece there. And it says that, well, it could have indicated a couple of things. It could have meant there is a cabin nearby, an actual cabin, that this is, someplace that you could stop. It also could mean, figuratively again, time to build a cabin. It could be getting into the dead of winter, and the locals there might know that it's going to get worse here in Pennsylvania in January and February. So the log cabin may not mean there's an actual log cabin available for you, but to prepare for a bad winter, stop traveling for now, hunker down. The block may well have been named after President Abraham Lincoln. We don't know. Shoe fly, another sort of a name of a person. It's a helper, a right-hand man or woman, helped his escaping slaves, and his responsibility was to secretly harbor them and to basically search out caves. If you had a home with a hidden place, that was one thing, but what happens when you're between homes? Many of the slaves hid in caves or cemeteries. Now, another thing about being in plain sight, a lot of people think, and even the elementary kids that I've lectured before think that, well, they always traveled at night and, slept during the day, I guess. But no, slave hunters can travel at night too, and with a full moon, that's no different than traveling in the day. The slaves were very creative in how they could travel in plain sight. Sometimes they would actually dress as workers, black workers. Many times craftsmen would come from the north to have to do work down in the south, and so if they were walking around with a hoe or something on their shoulder, they could be mistaken for an okay person, not a slave escaping. They also changed clothes a lot. Men would dress as women. Women would dress as men. They'd carry fake babies. They would push baby carriages. They'd do all sorts of things in plain sight and travel during the day, a good part of the time. So that's the shoe fly will help you do that, get you a disguise. I said something about if you're dressed too shabbily, you might call attention to yourself. Maybe not out in the wilderness, but if you're entering a metropolitan area, you're going to show up right away as a stranger. So this is a directive to dress up in plain sight. Free blacks would often meet the slaves in a safe place to give them fresh clothing, and so they wouldn't stand out. And that was nice. I guess there were no Goodwill stores back then. Follow the flying geese. Now we're going to get into a few of the block patterns that are basically saying, look at nature. If you want to go north, you don't want to go west, you don't want to go south, follow the geese. The geese go north at some times of the year, of course, so you got to be smart about this. This one's sometimes called the Dutchman's puzzle block. It's the earliest surviving quilt of 1800 was of this design. And this is interesting because here you see an example of all four directions in a single block. Many times they would make the whole quilt with all the arrows pointing the same way. And depending on how they hung it on the porch, this way, this way, this way, it would just look like a quilt to anybody that didn't know the code, but to others it would be like having a big detour that way, and they knew what to look for. It's always about going north, though. Always seek, and that for that reason you're always being guided by the stars, especially the Big Dipper, North Star. Follow the birds, sure. In flight or migration, the original quilt was designed by Deborah Coates of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And they actually ran, we know this historically, they ran Safe House number 5. I like this, the name. Drunkard's Path. Now what does that mean? Go out and get drunk? No, it means don't travel in a straight line, walk like you're drunk, backtrack, go an odd direction. If someone's trying to follow you, you don't want to give them a highway. You want to really, try to get them off your trail. The best advice, double back often, so it can be confusing to the hunters. And again, a boat, didn't know this before. Many black sailors were sympathetic. They were owners of their own ships up north. They would help by not only hiding them for a time, but by transporting them to another safe place. It may not be from Cleveland all the way to Canada. That's a pretty dangerous trip. More than likely, it would be from Cleveland to, Erie or something closer even. And they could also pass messages to other family members. Okay. North Star, that's the big one. I like that pattern. It's a really nice pattern. North Star was a guiding light leading the slaves from Cleveland or Detroit to Canada. Big Dipper always points to the North Star, and the North Star was what you needed to follow. Okay, now here are some of the ones that we've kind of gone through. What I'm going to do is have you, based on what you kind of remember or what you've got in your hands there, if we go from the upper left, what's the name of that one? Do you have what is it?
Mechanics.
Okay, sort of. That's the monkey wrench. Okay. See, I give you the crap. What's the next one? Crossroads. Okay. Log cabin. Okay. You might have seen it already, but the last one on the right looks like bow ties. They are bow ties. That's the bow ties. Then down at the bottom, flying geese, drunkard's path, North Star, and tumbling blocks. It says the time has come to box up everything, and throw it all in a box and head off. How many times have you moved in the past when you had great plans, started kind of late, everything was all packed neatly in boxes, and then the movers pulled into the driveway in the last few minutes, what do you got? Just throw everything in, including the trash, and then you get to where you're going to live next, and you go, what was this? Okay. So are there questions? That's sort of where we end here with the blocks. Yes, sir.
Have there been any estimates of the number of blacks that actually escaped to Canada prior to the Emancipation Proclamation?
Yeah, and I'm trying to think of, there's so many different estimates. I've heard as high as 30,000. Basically, it's at least 10,000. And Harriet Tubman is often the one that you hear confusing estimates for. She led this many slaves north, or she led this many slaves north. It really is something like anything else. You don't want to keep historical records and later be singled out for, you were responsible for this, so we're going to get you. That'd be a good thing to Google, because I can't remember now what the whole range is, but there were a lot. What I'd really like to see, and I haven't been able to get a good estimate, is how many died on the way, because it would be perhaps as few as 50% who actually made it all the way to Canada. How many were started out and recaptured by the slave hunters and returned? How many died from wild animals or from exposure to the winter in the north? How many just, fell on a trip like I do all the time and fell down and hit my head on a rock, But it's a good question. Many more than would have been able to do it on their own without the help of that whole community of conductors, safe houses, and the rest. Kathy?
Where were these quilts at that the slaves could see these clues? I mean, how did they reach them?
Well, that's where, if they were going to be educated, quote unquote, to know what these things meant, that started on the plantation with the seamstress there who would make, just like today, if you're doing cross stitch, you do a sampler, don't you? Sampler. They would do a sampler quilt of a lot of different blocks and teach them what does this mean. Once you left the plantation, you'd only see one of these at a time, and it would be wherever. It could be hanging always in plain sight. It wouldn't be go to the local quilt store and look for the quilts. Wherever people now, here again, I guess I should point out too, there are some decent scholars who say this is all nonsense. That they're pretty quilts, but nothing like this ever happened. Because it really all goes back to Azalea Williams, who said this is what it meant in my family. It may not have been as widespread as some of these scholars have said, and there are several. I think there's an article that I have somewhere, if you're interested, a pretty good article that says, and I like the way it ends, so what? Even if it's not entirely true, it could have been, and it certainly points out the fact that there were many people willing to help in whatever way they could figure out to get another human being out of the situation that they were in. So, and again, as I say, the Quakers were very active in this. Many other denominations that took the risk. But the abolitionists were predominantly Quakers from Philadelphia. Yep.
How did the people in the North learn about these clues from the plantation slavers?
Gee, I don't even know I've ever read about that. The question would be like, how many people in the North would, if you showed them one of these quilt patterns, would they say, oh, that's pretty? I mean, would they know even what it meant? I'm not sure. Again, when you go back to Bible history, oral history is a very powerful tool to tell the story to each generation, to keep telling it, to tell it. Much more than what has ever been written. History is passed more by mouth than by anything. So it's possible that up north there would have been those who told the stories. They wouldn't have read it in a newspaper or bought a book about it, but oral history would have been the powerful transmitter. Yeah. Anybody else? Okay. If you got few minutes. There's only one of these that I don't have, the Angelina and Sarah Grimke video I don't have with me, but that's the subject of the invention of wings, historical fiction. You can read about that later. But I really want to start out with, there was a 7-minute Beaver County Underground Railroad video that was produced by the Chamber of Commerce, I believe. And it's really, really good. It'll kind of sum up some of what I've talked about and maybe give you a sense of just how rich our local history is here, between here and the Ohio River. Are you up for it? Yes. All right. You've been a very attentive audience here. Now,
I was born in a shack made of mud and wood. 20 other people hanging from one spoon. There was no water and the money was rare. At times were hard even to say a prayer.
During the mid-1800s, the good citizens of Beaver County faced a dilemma: to aid in the capture and return of slaves traversing their land, or to risk their personal property and safety, and in some cases their lives, to shepherd slaves through the county's fields and creeks on an uneven path to freedom. This is the story of the choices that were made and Beaver County's station in the Underground Railroad. In the mid-19th century, the invention of the cotton gin and the proliferation of slavery bolstered the Southern economy. By contrast, brave abolitionists believed it was their duty to preserve human rights and to safely see the runaways through their towns, fields, and farms. This series of safe houses is known today as the Underground Railroad. Beaver County was a natural wayside for slaves for several distinct reasons. Arthur Bullis Bradford spread the word about Beaver County's station in lectures throughout the North. Beaver County's Quakers and First Presbyterians were ardent abolitionists, and the Ohio and Beaver Rivers provided a natural route for runaway slaves. Slaves hid by day and ran by night, oftentimes running through creeks to throw off the constant pursuit of bloodhounds. Slaves making their way into southern Beaver County from Washington County were afforded refuge at the Nelson House, home of James Nelson, an ardent Presbyterian abolitionist. From southern Beaver County, slaves traveled north, where they forded the Ohio River near Vanport and made their way to the next station, an old hotel in Bridgewater. Richard Gardner, a fugitive slave, lived in Beaver and preached to a Methodist congregation in Bridgewater. He was lured to a landing one day and was captured by a federal agent and returned to slavery in Kentucky. The citizens of Beaver were so outraged by Mr. Gardner's plight, they raised $600 to purchase his freedom. It took 2 years, but he was returned to his family in Beaver, where he lived out his life as a free man. In New Brighton, Quakers were among the first to provide safety and sustenance to slaves. The Townsends, New Brighton's founding family, helped to keep the Underground Railroad rolling. Edward Townsend built a trap door to his cellar. Benjamin Townsend accessed a cave on Penn Avenue and Allegheny Road. And David Townsend provided his grist mill on the Beaver River, all to shelter fleeing slaves. A secret room was discovered at the William Penn Townsend House that provided refuge to as many as 10 slaves at a time. The Townsends also employed a false-bottomed wagon to transfer slaves from one safe house to the next. Sarah Clark Lippincott, an ardent abolitionist, furthered the anti-slavery message in her many published articles in the New York Times. Abraham Lincoln referred to her as the Little Patriot, and her white cottage home still stands in New Brighton today. A walking tour of the Underground Railroad in New Brighton details the borough's many contributions. From New Brighton, there were 2 runaway routes, either north to Newcastle or west to Darlington. In Darlington, Arthur Bullis Bradford hid dozens of slaves at his delightful home, dubbed Buttonwood, before they continued their flight. Bradford once rode to the rescue of the safe house owner at the Dothit's Inn. A mob stood poised to murder the Dothit family until Bradford stood them down with rifle in hand, determined to shoot the first man who moved on the inn. Upon the mob's disbursement, Bradford discovered that his rifle was filled with mud from wasps and would have been useless had the mob made good on their intention. Several other homes in Darlington featured hidden rooms that concealed countless slaves, and a walking tour of Darlington's contribution to the Underground Railroad is also available. From Richmond to Mobile, Beaver County's benevolence became a whispered legend. Runaways sought the confluence of the Ohio and Beaver Rivers, knowing that a kind hand, a warm meal, clean clothing, and a safe haven was theirs for the asking. Frederick Douglass, himself a former slave, visited Darlington to speak about slavery. His speeches about his personal journey resonate today, as they did nearly 2 centuries ago.
The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, that the distance between me and the slave plantation from which I escaped is considerable, and the difficulties to be overcome in getting from the former to the latter are by no means slight. But let the religious press, the pulpit, the Sunday school, the missionaries, and the Bible array their immense power against slavery and slaveholding and the entire system of blood and pain can be scattered to the wind.
Beaver County citizens united to make Douglass's prophecy a reality, and Beaver County stations in the Underground Railroad will always be a proud chapter in our storied history.
And then this is...
Hello, my name is Lars Morrison, and I'm standing in the foyer of Covenant Presbyterian Church in downtown Butler. I would like to take you on a small historical adventure. Hello again. We now stand in the undercroft of the steeple tower. Down here you will find about 40,000 tons of rock, 5 or 6 pounds of dust, 3,000 cubic feet of air, and the weight of history like you've never felt it before. For this was a station on the Underground Railroad. Let me take you through it. The Underground Railroad operated before what I call the Great Insanity. What Northerners call the Civil War, what Southerners call the war between the states, and they're still fighting it. But to me, brother against brother is the greatest kind of insanity that there can be. We had very, very brave men on our session back in those days. Because the way the laws were written, if any church or organization was found to help a runaway slave, the ruling members go to jail and get fined. The pastor or president go to jail and get fined. The church is confiscated. The manse is confiscated. We have nothing. Difficult times. Now, what I'm about to tell you was never written down for very obvious reasons. As they say today, never put something in an email because you'll never be able to take it out. So nothing was ever written down. However, in the early part of the 21st century, we had a congregant here whose name was Lois. And Lois was 103 years old at that point in time. And her grandparents had been with the Underground Railroad and helped with it. And her grandfather told his son, who told his children, of which Lois was one. And I got to interview Lois, and it was quite the something. When we had the COVID pandemic, I was totally prepared, because Lois took me through the Spanish influenza of the early 20th century. So no surprises there. And she finished up talking, and she said, "Can I tell you something? It's a big, huge secret, and you'll probably get in trouble for it, but I have to tell somebody, please." And I said, "Go ahead, Lois." And she said, "It's about slaves." And she said it just like that. And I said, "The Underground Railroad?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Go ahead and talk, Lois. I promise you, the statute of limitations has long run out on that. Nobody will get in any kind of trouble." So she sat for another hour and told me the story, part of which I'm going to tell you. I don't know if you can see beside me here, you'll probably see it later, but we have several reproductions of broadsides. Posters that were so by so that were put up on trees and houses and mercantiles and barns, trying to bring back these runaway slaves because they were valuable property. A slave back in those days would go for $1,000 to $1,500. Now today, that's a nice weekend out. Back then, that's a year's wages for a wealthy man. It would be $50,000 to $60,000 to buy the same person today. So you wanted to keep a hold of them because you didn't feed them very, very well. You didn't clothe them very, very well. They lived in hovels, but they produced an incredible amount of free labor under the aegis of the slave master. So it was not unusual for a plantation to bring in literally $500,000 a year in revenue, which, think about it today, that's a significant amount of money. But the slaves were very poorly treated. They weren't people at all. You didn't have men, women, and children. You had bucks, does, and pickaninnies. One of the bits of economics in the slave trade, you get a buck, you get a doe, you put them together in a dark room, 9 months later, you have one of these. You know what that is? That's saleable goods. So you take that saleable good, and for 5 years you feed it, more or less, you clothe it, more or less, and when they're about 4 years old, you start teaching them how to keep house, how to cook, how to farm, how to ranch, how to work with the animals, and you teach them this for 2 years. Then you take them a few miles down the road and you sell them for $1,000. And it has probably cost you $20 to feed and clothe and house this creature for the 5 to 7 years that you do so. That's a pretty good return on your money. As I said, the slaves were very, very poorly treated. Whipped, burned, branded, abused. It was not pretty. But they were considered property. They weren't human. Even though humans, white men, could obviously interbreed with them, they were still not humans. Strange thing. Having given you just a little bit of the background of slavery, let me take you to a physical location and show you something. A large hole in the church foundation. It's about 2.5 to 3 feet deep. Huge, heavy stones. Now, when we were operating as a station on the Underground Railroad, where I'm standing did not exist. This was built long after the Great Insanity. But there was a small chimney here that was camouflaged, thank you, camouflaged with a flat of just turf. And the slaves would come in at night, and when we brought here, the turf would be lifted up, and the slaves, 3, 4, 5, very rarely any more than that, would slide into there. They would have food, they would have water. Maybe if somebody could afford a blanket, they would give a blanket, and then the cover would be put back on. There is no light in there. It's only about 3 feet high. So you are lying in there on your back, on your belly, on your side, breathing, making no sound because that can be heard above you, in absolute dark, with the mice and the rats and the centipedes and the ants crawling all over you. And oh my goodness, what do you do when nature calls and that morning glass of water needs to continue its cosmic journey? You feel your way to someplace else, take care of what you need to take care of, and then your comrades will do this. Now you can't hear that, but in the silence it makes enough noise that can guide you back to where they are. After a day, 2, maybe 3, the north wall, we're in the south right now, the north wall would be opened up. There was a little door there. The slaves would crawl out, go through what was then our graveyard next door, and continue on up to, we think, somewhere around where the old stone house is, near Slippery Rock, which was the next station on the Underground Railroad. Now, you have seen a close-up shot of some of the replications of the broadsides that were down there. And the sharp-eyed people amongst you would have seen that there was one that said Negroes, consisting of so many men, so many women, and so many children. This was the language used by the merchants. Buck, doe, and pickaninny were used by the owners to, again, further dehumanize the slaves. $100 reward, ran away from the subscriber on the 27th of July, my black woman named Emily. He describes Emily, tells what she was wearing, what she took with her, and is offering a $100 reward if taken on this side of Kentucky. But if she gets into Ohio and is taken in Ohio, it becomes $300. Because Ohio was a free state, and if the slave catchers caught a slave there and they were caught, they were kidnappers and could be prosecuted under the federal laws. So this was danger money. Now $300 to us doesn't seem like much. But if I said, all right, $10,000 if you get you on this side, $30,000 if you get you on the other side. That might seem a little better to you today. Caution, colored people of Boston, one and all. You are hereby respectfully cautioned and advised to avoid conversing with the watchmen and police officers of Boston. For the order of the mayor and the aldermen, they have been allowed to act as kidnappers and slave catchers. So there were also some very good, very brave people out there helping the slaves get away. Dave?
Okay, I'm hoping that'll just stop. Yep, good. That's all I've got for you, but there are plenty of other information sources besides what I've got. I put a few of them here. There are 6 of these packets. Anybody that really wants to dive in a little bit more, there are a lot of extra reading in there. There's some that I mentioned, a few of the articles up here about unraveling the myth of coated quilts, and this is the one that has a little bit of maybe not opinion about that. And then one that I've got the little map still here for you to take with you. Anything else, if you want me to send you anything, I can do that. But you've been a very good audience, just like my congregation. Thank you. One of whom is sitting right back here. How you doing, Joan? Good.